then let's get back to the content of President Xi Jinping's speech a little earlier on at the Palace of Nations in Geneva. I'm now joined in studio yet again by Dr. Robert Kagiri, Director in charge of Strategy and Policy Management at the African Policy Institute. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
The UN Secretary General a little earlier spoke about the need for multilateral solutions right across the board. But where does that leave African states? We don't exactly have a seat at the table. For example, we don't have representation at the UN Security Council.
Yes, this is true, but the message of multilateralism is key to Kenya and other African countries because China has been backing the inclusion of Africa to get a Security Council seat, especially Nigeria.
Yeah.
So we are going to be moving, when we talk about multilateralism and representation and equity, and with the backing of China, we'll be able to see Africa slowly gain prominence in world affairs and in international organizations, in particular the United Nations. So that is a key deliverable by China for Africa.
Right.
Yes.
You've actually just segued neatly into my next question. The President also spoke about the development gap and how it's widening, and coming off the back of his very robust defense of free trade, open trade at the World Economic Forum. This is pretty interesting. Yes. The development gap, though, that's a reality for a lot of African countries because we've seen a lot of high growth over the last decade or so, but at the same time, income inequality just keeps getting wider and wider and wider. How do we solve that?
President Xi spoke about this even in his earlier speech before this particular one, when he talked about globalization as an ideal, but an ideal that needs to be reconfigured because it has had its problems. And one of the problems has been disparity in development. There's been a lot of the 1% issue, where 1% owns 90% of the world. So the disparity issue is a key issue. And what President Xi spoke about is a need to reconfigure and have an all-inclusive and more equitable kind of development, where we are bringing in nations, big or small, like he said today, rich and poor, and giving them equal access to opportunities and helping to catapult the ones who are left behind forward. This will probably can be best illustrated by what he has in mind with his One Belt, One Road connectivity initiative that will help to bring about more opportunities for countries in Africa and bring more equitable development.
Speaking of common challenges, I mean, he also spoke about security, and that has been a bit of a recurring theme across his speeches over the last 48 hours. Terrorism being cited as a common enemy of nations around the world. Should we expect to see a lot more Chinese involvement with boots on the ground, not just in terms of funding, but more boots on the ground, more logistic support for peacekeeping operations across Africa?
I expect so, and it is already happening. We already have China being one of the largest contributors of UN troops in terms of growth, recent growth. And then right here in Africa, we have them as part of the United Nations mission in South Sudan, UNMISS. They have opened up a military base off the port of Djibouti, which is mainly for promoting the developmental peace initiative that they want to have in Africa and take care of some of the conflict-torn areas that we have. So there are already boots on the ground. We're going to probably be seeing more of this, and we expect that this is in line with what China is trying to develop, which is developmental peace. Without peace and stability, there can be no investment.
Right, because the money simply won't flow to a war-torn area.
Right.
There was also something else that cropped up here. The UN Secretary General mentioned it when he started his speech, essentially saying, look, the Paris Agreement would not have happened if China had not come to the table and actually signed that deal. And the President emphasized the country's commitment to implementing the Paris Agreement. But with respect to African countries, some of us have started to ratify the agreement, but we definitely need to do more. The question is, what more do we need to do? Should we start making solar power, for example, mandatory across households? Do we need to start talking about implementing carbon taxes in African economies?
Well, for Africa, we are not the biggest culprits in terms of emissions and the kind of problems that are faced by more developed economies in terms of climate change. But having said that, that does not mean that we should not take some initiatives. And what we can gain from countries like China is knowledge transfer and technology transfer in implementing some of the things you spoke about, like solar power, powering our energy with in ways that do not emit without dangerous emissions to the air. So what we can expect is that if we continue cooperating with them, we shall gain from their technology advancements and transfer some of what they have done in their country to ours to ensure that we do not get to where the more advanced economies have gotten.
Right.
So it's an issue of learning from them and them assisting us in aid and in transfer of skills and technology.
Right. One last
Yes.
question for you.
Right.
This essentially is a direct quote from the President in his speech just about an hour ago.
Yes.
We will pursue common result-oriented development with African countries. China, of course, being the biggest single trading partner for African states and has been since 2009. But what
Right.
aspects of Sino-African trade do we need to improve? Where's the room for improvement here?
The main area that we need to improve on now, that we are already on board in terms of infrastructure and connectivity development, that is already on track. What we need to move toward to now is more of industrialization and more of moving labor-intensive industries that can be done here in Africa. Once this connectivity aspect is completely resolved, we expect that China should see Africa as a springboard to the other markets of the world, and one that has comparative advantages, not only in terms of being low cost, but also in terms of having the right skills. We in Africa need to convince China that we have the ability to take up we have the ability to take up the task, that we are up to the task in terms of producing world-class products, and China should now use us in partnership to get their own gains and to help Africa gain from this whole process as well. In terms of connectivity, Africa itself stands to gain from intra-Africa trade. And this is another area that we shall gain from. Through this connectivity under the One Belt, One Road initiative, we expect, and this is AU's plan as well, to connect us all. We expect that there will be more intra-trade, more cross-border trade, and freer countries will open up, and there'll be more free trade within African countries themselves. So I expect that the cooperation and the idea of inclusive and shared destiny and shared prosperity that is being propagated by President Xi will spill over into Africa and to our great benefit. And he also spoke about the fact that China is where it is because of the rest of the world. And this kind of message is the kind of message Africans have been looking to hear, that we are not going back to the imperialist situation where we were just providing raw materials, but we are in a situation where we are participating, we are partners and participating in shared development and shared prosperity.
Right.
Yes.
All right. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for your input.
Thank you very
Kagiri.
much for having me.
Right. We're speaking, of course, to Dr. Robert Kagiri from the African Policy Institute.